Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game tactics video. In this video we'll be talking about guided missiles, what makes them good and how to defend against them. I thought this would be a useful video to put out because guided missiles have kind of re-entered the community conversation recently, although as usual the conversation has been about how to nerf them rather than about how to defend against them, or to put it another way, how we as players can make guided missiles less powerful by becoming better at playing against them. So what makes guided missiles good? Well, guided missiles are good because they are a zero-risk way of attacking your opponent. That's really relevant in a game like Infinity, which is about risk management almost more than it is about things like resource management. The face-to-face roll mechanic in Infinity means that whenever you take an engagement, traditionally you're exposed to at least some risk. Your opponent might shoot you successfully in reactive, which means that zero-risk ways of engaging your opponent are very, very strong. Now, the price of using guided missiles is that it's order and material inefficient. You have to set up a pitcher or a repeater, a means of spotlighting your opponent, then you have to spotlight your opponent, then you have to succeed the missile strike. This is at least theoretically less efficient than moving and shooting someone, although guided missiles become strong in environments where it is not difficult to do those first steps, where it's not difficult to move forward and establish a pitcher network, for example. In particular, guided missiles tend to become a popular means of attacking when null deployment becomes popular. So when I say null deployment, what I mean is hunkering down, hiding in your deployment zone, presenting no targets for your opponent to shoot, on the basis that if your opponent can't move forward easily and attack you easily, then their attacks against you will be inefficient. Null deployment means hiding in your deployment zone, having everything as hunkered down and defended as possible, which is a really good way of making your opponent's conventional attacks efficient, but it comes at the cost of making indirect attacks, like guided missile strikes, more attractive. Now, does this mean I think you shouldn't null deploy? No, null deployment is good for a reason. There are many big guns in the game, and the game favors active turn. But when you are conducting your defense, when you're deploying and figuring out how to survive your opponent's first turn, you need to bear in mind that not just null deployment is what's going to take to save you in a game. A successful defense includes a mix of techniques, one of which is preventing your opponent from having easy face-to-face rolls against good targets, but otherwise will still require you to consider how you're going to contest the midfield and stop your opponent from just easily carrying out what it is they want to do, which might include missile strikes. So what we have set up here in TTS is just some Nomad models and some Hackislam models, which I'm not whole armies, which I'm going to use to demonstrate some basic techniques and tactics and talk about how you actually want to conduct a defense against guided missiles. We're going to assume that the Nomad player has won the Lieutenant role and is choosing to go first, and so the Hackislam player needs to survive a turn where the Nomads will be using missiles as part of their attacks. Let's start by talking about some basic stuff that you can do to make missiles less attractive for your opponent. So, the first thing that you want to do when you're thinking about conducting a deployment against a missile attack is to make it as inefficient as possible for your opponent to make those missile attacks. This starts by making sure that missile strikes themselves don't get high returns. You do not ever want to be in a situation where multiple models can be hit by a single missile. Now, this is more difficult when you're playing sectoral factions with linked teams who have to deploy somewhat close together, but even then it should not be too difficult to deploy even a core linked team in a position where no one is going to get hit by a missile that targets another model. And that starts with simple spacing, but also includes things like elevation levels. So let's have a look at these two Hassassin Barids. So right now, if I had these two Barids deployed here and here, I would be putting them at risk. If one of those two models got targeted, then a missile strike on one would potentially hit both. You can start by just putting models always 2 inches apart. That's your kind of safe zone. So here we can see they're 2.1 inches apart. That's the radius at which a missile template targeted on a small base Silhouette 2 model won't hit any other models. 2 inches is your safe zone. Now, you can't measure that at deployment except as part of link team deployments, but you should get good at eyeballing it and just, if in doubt, be safe. You can also use elevation levels to have models more closely together and still be safe. I'll show you what I mean. So if we move this same Berid over to here, and they're both prone, neither Berid will be hit by a missile that targets another Berid. The reason for this is that when an impact template is placed on a model, it's placed at ground level and it propagates outwards and upwards. It does not penetrate through terrain because models that have total cover from the blast focus aren't hit by the blast. This means that if this Berid is hit by a missile, the blast focus will be on ground level and it will be stopped from hitting this Berid by this lip here because this Berid's on higher elevation. Vice versa, if this Berid is hit by a missile, the blast will propagate outwards but not down, meaning that this Berid is safe. Now, this is a very simple example. You wouldn't necessarily want these two models exactly here, but that's another way to do it. Watch out for terrain that is like a ramp. You kind of have to figure out how to play that with your opponent. But if in doubt, use elevation in addition to just simple 2-inch distancing to make sure that you are never in a situation where multiple models are hit by the same missile. The next thing you want to do, and continuing on from that, is to the extent possible, make sure that multiple models, or at least multiple valuable models, can't get caught in the same picture radius. Now, I've only got some basic models set up here on this table, but if you think about how you're going to conduct your defense and where your opponent is going to want to put their pitches down or move their repeaters forward, there's going to be a limit to how far they can penetrate forward, where they can actually place their pitches. And although a pitcher covers a very large radius, right, it's a more than 16-inch diameter circle, that's not infinite. So if you have pieces that are vulnerable to missile strikes, for example, you maybe have your lieutenant and a decoy, say you're playing nomads and you have 2 moderators, put them in very different locations. Don't put them both in positions where they can be caught in the same in the same pitcher area. This means that your opponent can make a first turn attack where they get 1 pitcher down, that's all they need to do, and then they spotlight the first moderator and kill it, and spotlight the second moderator and kill it. This has made their attack efficient because they've presumably put you in loss of lieutenant, whereas it would have been inefficient if your moderators had been on different parts of the table. You need to know what kind of is valuable here in your list, but it'll usually be things like your attack pieces, your tags, your own guided missile elements, your support pieces. You decide what is valuable in your list and what you want to make sure you have when your first turn begins, but put those pieces in places where, if possible, it's not easy for your opponent to catch lots of valuable things inside a picture. What's especially important to use here is depth. So if we just sort of scroll out a little bit, you can see that I've got pieces way back in the bottom of my deployment zone, using space, using the full 12 inches, because although, yes, pitches are fairly easy to shoot, they've got good 16-inch range bands, and you can even risk shooting them beyond that, every extra order that your opponent has to spend moving the model with the pitcher or the fast power panda forward makes their attack less efficient. This is actually the exact same principle that makes null deployment good, right? If you are hunkered down and it is hard for your opponent to attack you, then their attacks are inefficient. You are more likely to have more of your pieces survive, and your opponent is likely to have to expend more resources to accomplish the same goal. The difference between conventional null deployment and specifically making sure that you are adapted to missile strikes is that really it's mostly just depth and, to an extent, table positioning that makes you safe from pitcher attacks. It's not just being in total cover. So if we look at this deployment example, just to put this in practice, I don't really have everything down here, but you can see where I've placed Saladin. Saladin is my obvious lieutenant, and let's assume that I don't have a Havsa pretending to be a second Saladin anywhere. It's therefore really important that I protect him in particular. So, firstly, he's not really positioned near anything else. There are not lots of pieces near him that a pitcher strike would put me at risk of. Secondly, my opponent needs to get a pitcher pretty far into my part of the table in order to target him, right? So 8 inches from Saladin is like here, which means that my opponent doesn't just have to get a pitcher to the edge of my deployment zone, they have to get a picture sort of pretty far in, which is not necessarily straightforward. Finally, in this example, where are my opponent's threats coming from? Now, the missile launcher is deployed back here, but it is not the threat. The threat is the pitchers, the repeaters, and the fast pandas. Now, in this case, there are two Massey Morans, but they are deployed prone on rooftops in obvious defensive positions without easy ways down, so they can kind of be discounted. The actual threats are Pywell with his pitcher in sync mode, Jazz's pitcher, and then this 16-inch deployed camouflage marker, which, oh, yep, it's a heckler jammer with a fast panda. Now, you won't always know that, but it's something to be aware of. That's sort of another, where can the pitches come from? There could, for example, also be a meteor zone off the table. This means that the positions my opponent has that they can launch pitches from is sort of these models here moving in this direction, and these models here moving in this direction. So what we want to do is we want to position our pieces with depth relative to those elements. So this space here, this nook back at the very end, it's kind of, it's a long way away from the heckler and Jazz, and it's relatively far from Zoe and Pywell. I don't love this path up here that Zoe and Pywell have, but we can defend against that in other ways. This is where your hard AROs and defensive mix come into play. Now, I haven't set up a perfect defense here, but I've shown some examples of pieces that are good defensively and which will be relevant in this case. So what have we got? Well, we've identified Jazz over here and a heckler with a fast panda over here. So one option is to deploy a camouflage Libertos and its mine to make this run inefficient. Hecklers in particular have to get closer than other pieces, and if a heckler has to move through a mine in order to lay its panda, that's fantastic. You just killed a 23-point piece in ARO, or have a good chance of doing so. Awesome. So we've contested that. We've also got something like a Dalami Panzerfaust. Now we could put it here, we could put another one up here, and what we're looking to do there, these are cheap ARO pieces. Not everyone has access to those, but you have things like Noctifers, or even total reaction bots, or even flash pulse bots in a pinch, right? Flash pulse bots can be viable ARO pieces, and what you want to do is you want to pick at the approaches that your opponent has telegraphed as moving their pitches forward. So Zoe and Pywell look like they want to come up this direction. What do? We put Panzerfausts, or flash pulses, or whatever, watching that position so that they have to first be dealt with before your opponent can move forward. So, a model that is looking like a Sunduk bot, or a Dalami, or even just a total reaction board, or whatever hard ARO you have. Even if you have like a tag, and you put your tag maybe here, this is not a particularly great defensive map, but anyway, or something else, just, you've got your link teams, you don't want to contest the whole board, but you can afford to contest this line here. That pins them back and makes any attack with them have to be supported by smoke or by a firepower engagement, which your opponent then has to assume some risk, which is not what they want if they're doing missile attacks. So position your AROs with an eye toward bracketing in your opponent's picture and network projection pieces as they move into and through the midfield. The usual rules for defense apply here. Don't put anything out as a hard ARO that you are not comfortable losing or having to recover. Put your AROs in pieces where your opponent has to move to engage them, not where they can be engaged safely in one order from the deployment zone, etc., etc. Libertos are always a great piece if you're playing vanilla here, because they can put on the 20-inch line, which means that by definition they are 8 inches beyond your deployment zone, which means that they are in that position where they are starting to threaten, where models with pitchers want to move to if they want to push a pitcher deep into your DZ. Special mention here also goes to the Meteor Zond and to a lesser extent Nomad airborne troops with deployable repeaters. Defending against airborne troops is its own separate topic and mostly comes down to recognizing that those pieces are coming. Remember that there is a 15 trooper limit. If you see, for example, a Nomad player with an Evo hacker and an obvious troop slot missing and a guided missile slot, bear in mind that something that might be coming is a Vertigo Zond. Defending against a Vertigo Zond is not that difficult. But it's only, defending against a Meteor Zond is not that difficult, but it's only not that difficult if you know that it's coming. Now, in this case, the Hakusan player has a particular advantage, and that's that the piece that is most vulnerable to a Meteor Zond landing near it is Saladin, who has a repeater, which means that if the Meteor Zond lands, it will at least risk an Oblivion attack from a Barid, which will turn its repeater off. As a niche and rare tactic to mention at this point, if you are playing a faction that has access to impersonators, I would not generally recommend this, but you can just deploy impersonators near models that you don't want to get missile struck. An impersonator can't be the target of an attack. It's not allowed to be. It's treated as a friendly by the enemy, which means that if they launch that missile attack, which is always a template, and that attack would overlap your impersonator model, the attack fizzles because a trooper will refuse to carry out an order that would hit a friendly. I don't generally recommend this, but something I have been doing recently, if you have access to impersonators, is deploying them next to the missile bot. This forces your opponent to pull back to deal with them, but also means that if they take a missile launcher attack, you get to shoot the missile bot. At minimum, this forces them to move the missile bot away, which again makes it inefficient to launch missile attacks without giving up what ostensibly would be a null deployment or a good deployment mix. Okay, so that's deployment. In short, null deployment is good, but bear in mind that it needs to be part of a defensive mix, and recognize where your opponent's threats are coming from. Note that you have to engage and stop pitches from reaching you, not necessarily the missile launcher itself. Set up in ways that make missiles inefficient, in particular always making sure that you are never in a situation where one missile can hit two targets, and to the extent possible, spreading out through and deep into your entire deployment zone, so that it is difficult for one pitcher to do lots and lots of work. This is a way of making the missile attacks less efficient, which makes them less powerful overall. Moving into your first reactive turn. Your opponent's deployed, you've deployed, you now have to survive a missile attack. You have your hard AROs, let's assume that to an extent some of them go down, and your opponent gets a repeater into your deployment zone. What do you then do? So let's say that Zoe and Pywell have made a run all the way up this side of the table. Maybe Pywell has had to get shot and has gone unconscious, but he has successfully placed a pitcher down. Now, just to note, to get within 16 inches, Pywell has to get literally across the halfway line. But let's assume that he makes the run, he's a synchronized troop, he's expendable, and he gets a pitcher down within range of Saladin. The good news in this case is that the pitcher is 7.6 inches away, which means it's not within 6, which would have required it to be even closer and probably not reachable by Pywell, which means that you can guts roll after a successful attack. So the pitcher lands and spotlight attacks begin. At this point, you have two options, dodge or reset. You get to dodge if you have a valid ARO, blah, blah, blah. It can be correct to dodge, and I'm actually not 100% on that. I'm not sure about dodging in response to being hacked, but let's just assume that it's possible. Most of the time, though, you will want to reset. You will want to reset just because that, you just keep trying to reset, because the longer you successfully reset, the less efficient your opponent's attack becomes. Once your opponent succeeds, and if they're willing to spend enough orders, they will succeed eventually, and they target your miniature. Remember that you're then subject to a guts roll. You get a guts roll anytime you are forced to make an armor or BTS roll, or anytime a state is inflicted on you. So in this case, we can see we're 7.6 inches from the repeater. A failed guts roll in this case means trying to leave the danger area. So Saladin will stay prone and move 1 inch to leave range of the repeater area. Now he's still spotlit. He's still probably going to get attacked by a missile. But it means that if he survives and successfully resets, he's not in danger of another spotlight and missile attack. Why would I attempt to reset? Well, it can be the better thing to do in a lot of circumstances. Once the missiles start landing, you need to make the call on whether you're going to dodge or reset. And that is basically it's a risk assessment. How many orders does your opponent have left? How many missiles are they going to shoot? Dodging is usually a low chance of surviving because you will usually be at -3, but it can be the only chance of surviving. If you are desperate for the model to live, you may consider dodging. Or if the model actually is kind of expendable and you want your opponent to keep firing missiles at it for as long as possible, you may consider dodging. But it can be right more often than not to declare a reset, particularly if the model is even moderately survivable and is high whip. The classic example here is if you're playing an avatar. An avatar is very unlikely to get killed by a single missile and is very likely to successfully reset. So you reset against a guided missile strike, forcing your opponent to then go through the rigmarole of spotlighting you again. In Saladin's case, he is not hugely likely to survive a guided missile, but he is not going to survive 2 or 3 or 4 missile strikes. His best chance of survival in this circumstance is to try and survive just off of armor and no wounding cap, or maybe your opponent missing a single missile strike, which he might potentially be able to do, and resetting off of his whip 16. Models like, for example, Sun Ce are even better at this, because Sun Ce, marksman leader who I've used a few times in Yuqing, is almost certain to survive at least 1 missile strike, and very likely to be able to successfully reset. My Toha opponents locally have become very good at learning when to reset, and tack wheel officers are another piece that is in this kind of like just survivable to give it a go. So Saladin, right, armor 3, no wounding cap. Tack wheel officer, armor 3, 2 wounds effectively, and the regeneration skill, even tougher than Saladin. These models have a passable, not good, but passable chance of surviving a missile strike. And if they successfully reset, then that's it. You've cleared the danger, and you've probably put your opponent either all the way back to step 1, where they would now need to get another pitcher down close enough to hit Saladin, or you've totally removed the risk for a turn, or at minimum you've pushed them back to having to go through the whole process of spotlighting you again. So remember that reset is a valid ARO against being struck by a guided missile, and is something that you will want to do a surprisingly large amount of the time. So, to summarize, your defensive options once your reactive turn begins are relatively limited, but if you have set your deployment up well and you have a good defensive mix, including some hard AROs to bracket your opponent's pitches back, then you are likely to make it at least somewhat inefficient for them to make guided missile attacks against you, to the extent that their ability to do damage to you, although it's unlikely to be totally removed, will be limited. You want to prioritize which pieces you want to survive, protect your army as best you can, and accept that there will be some casualties. This is where I want to just talk generally about how to evaluate whether or not a defensive turn has been successful. This is something that is often missed in the guided missile conversation. It is important to recognize that casualties in ARO are okay. It is extremely rare to get through a reactive turn without taking some damage. Infinity is a game that favors the aggressor. A turn reactively can be a success even if you have taken casualties. In fact, if you go second and you begin your first turn and you've only taken maybe 2 or 3 casualties, that is a successful defensive turn. If you've taken 4 casualties, that's probably bad. If you've taken 5, that's pretty terrible. But if you get through your first turn only losing 1 or 2 or 3 models, that's probably good. And that is what is likely if you have been the target of a turn 1 missile attack. If you've set up well, you've spaced your models out, you've avoided the likelihood of one missile hitting multiple models, and you've layered your defenses so that it is inefficient for your opponent, or is at least challenging for your opponent to move their network forward, you are probably not going to take lots of casualties, but you will take some. This is probably good. If you lost 2 models to a guided missile attack on your first turn, but that's all you lost, it means that your defense was a success. It also means that your general null defense and defensive mix was good enough that your opponent couldn't just easily engage you with guns and instead had to come after you with inefficient means of attack like guided missiles. Only 2 casualties, even if they are to a nominally frustrating kind of attack style like guided missiles, is totally fine. Recognize when your defense has succeeded and what success looks like, because it will really help make things like missile attacks much less frustrating. If the pitches have landed and you've been spotlit and you've lost a model and then you lose another model, and that's really annoying, but that's all that you lost, you've just had a really good first reactive turn. Now you do have to clear those damn pitches off, and you should have some pieces to do that. That kind of leads us into your first active turn. Recognize that your reactive turn was a success. Okay, so You've survived your first reactive turn against guided missiles, and now it's your go. This is the point at which my ability to give guidance becomes a little bit more nebulous, because launching an attack into an enemy defense is really going to depend a lot on what they've got and what you've got, what is in your list. It's sort of much less broadly contextual and much more specific to the tools, pieces, tables, etc. But some general things to note. If your opponent has made missile attacks against you, that means that they'll have had to expend at least some resources, in particular material, right? They've had to use some of their pitches, which you should probably destroy because they remain a threat. They've probably also pushed some pieces with pitches forward, which might represent easy attacks for you to make. Those are models that will have to have moved into the midfield and generally are not amazing at defending themselves. So think about the easy and low impact attacks that easy and high impact, low danger attacks that you can make against models ill suited to surviving a counterattack. You can also think about if missiles are a major part of your opponent's offensive mix, defanging or attacking into that. That can mean attacking the missile launcher itself, although the missile launcher being sort of a key piece often is itself defended by depth. It's pretty common, for example, to have missile bots be deployed like this one all the way at the back of the deployment zone. But if you can't go after the missile launcher, then you can go after things like your opponent's hackers. If you've got pitches yourself, it can be very efficient to move forward and try and engage your opponent's hackers and kill all of the hackers that your opponent has that can easily use Spotlight. In fact, this is often the more dangerous, more effective first turn attack over and above making guided missile launches. If your opponent is coming after you with GMLs and they have Trinity in their list, and you have hackers that are vulnerable to Trinity, and they are choosing to make missile strikes rather than Trinity you, rejoice, you have an opponent who has not recognized the most efficient means of attacking at their disposal. If you are attacking into an opponent that has guided missiles, they'll have placed pitches, and they might also have repeaters, either in their deployment zone or in the case of nomads in Maso Morans. So you then need to consider how are you going to attack into Spotlight as an ARO. Now, Spotlight is not immediately lethal. It is quite annoying to be targeted, but Spotlight does not become a lethal ARO until your opponent survives their reactive turn and transitions back into active. So in that time, you need to consider, what are you attacking with? Are you attacking with things that you are comfortable losing? So for example, warbands and dogged pieces usually are pieces that you should be comfortable pushing into a repeater network in order to kill the repeaters, because those are pieces that are making a one-way trip anyway and don't necessarily need to survive. You can also try to push deep and go after your opponent's guided missile launcher, or as a niche but relevant tactic, if you feel like there is no way but to get Spotlight in ARO in order to launch your attack, but along the way you render an opponent's model unconscious, then you can just end your turn near the enemy unconscious model. Remember what I said before about impersonators, where a guided missile attack is always a template, it can't not be, and a model will never attack a friendly troop. If you use that 2-inch radius, if you put your targeted models at the end of a turn near enemy unconscious models, then they will become effectively immune to guided missile attacks, because there is no way for your opponent to place the template directly centered over your model without hitting a friendly. Now, this is something that you have to just kind of be aware of. It won't always be possible because you won't always leave bodies. Sometimes your opponent will fail many armor rolls, sometimes you'll have shock ammunition, etc. But it is something that comes up, if you're aware of it, surprisingly often, and saves you from having to spend those awkward end-of-turn orders resetting or trying to clear targeted, which you never want to do. It yourself is not efficient. So in active, the advice I can give, sort of by definition, has to be more generic, and it really does just boil down to try to make effective attacks with pieces that, if they get spotlit, you are comfortable either with them being destroyed by a missile attack or with it not mattering, basically. You use your good, cheap, disposable offensive elements to push through a repeater network and deal damage efficiently, etc., etc. You can also try and move around repeater networks, find gaps in them, use stealth. There are lots of ways that you might effectively attack once you have your first active turn. As your active turn begins to conclude, if you have not eliminated your opponent's missile capacity, then remember all of the things that I spoke about at deployment. Don't have models end the turn in ways that make missile attacks efficient. Don't clump up. Don't let missiles strike multiple targets. This is more difficult if you're moving link teams around, but try to avoid moving your troops into the midfield in a way where a single repeater or a single pitcher can effectively allow an enemy hacker to target multiple models. All of the same deployment advice applies to ending your first active turn. So that's been half an hour of talking. I hope you found that reasonably useful. In very short summary, guided missiles are a way of attacking that are order inefficient, usually speaking, but risk efficient. You make guided missiles bad for your opponent by making the order inefficiency part basically as inefficient as possible. There are ways to do that, but it mostly comes down to positioning, which as you learn will serve you well. Do I think that guided missiles are okay in their current state in the game? Mostly yes. They certainly received a massive shot in the arm from N3 to N4, and I respect that they are frustrating to play against because they are non-interactive, but I do think it's really important to recognize that if your opponent is using guided missiles against you, it probably means that your defensive setup otherwise is really good. If you've become good at defending, that's excellent. The next thing to do is to learn to be good at defending against guided missiles, which is totally possible. We learned to defend against turn 1 alpha strikes early in N4, and we're learning to defend against guided missile attacks now. As we do, the game will become better and better. As players get better at defending, the game goes longer, there is more chance for interesting things to happen over multiple turns, we get to experience more and more of the full depth, and the tactics that players have to employ offensively become more interesting. The better we all are at defending, the better we all have to get at attacking, and the more interesting the game becomes over the course of its 3 turns. Would I be okay if Corvus Belli changed missiles? Yep, probably, totally. I don't mind using them. I quite like using them and don't mind them being used against me. And I think it would be a loss to see them go. But ultimately, that kind of doesn't matter. It's we as players and how good we are at the game that determines how strong something is in the general sense. And if you want guided missiles to be less prevalent, get good at dealing with guided missiles. Hopefully this video has been helpful in that respect, and I'll see you again for something else soon.